What you're about to hear is not just the story of a missing man, it's the story of how one quiet disappearance changed an entire state. In June 2001, Jason Jolkowski, a 19-year-old from Omaha, Nebraska, left his home to meet a coworker for a ride to work. He never made it. No witnesses, no struggle, no trace. His case would later inspire a landmark law, but his whereabouts remain a mystery to this day. Stay until the end, because Jason's story proves that sometimes, even in silence, a voice can change everything. On the morning of June 13th, 2001, the day began like any other for Jason Anthony Jolkowski. He was a soft-spoken, responsible 19-year-old college student working part-time at a local restaurant called Fazoli's. He was saving money, studying broadcasting at a community college, and living with his parents in a quiet Omaha neighborhood. That morning, Jason's manager at Fazoli's called. An unexpected shift had opened, and they asked if he could come in. Jason agreed. His car, however, was in the repair shop. So, he made plans to meet his co-worker about half a mile from his home at Benson High School, where they could carpool together. At around 10:45 a.m., Jason told his younger brother that he was heading out and would return that evening. He grabbed his wallet, keys and work clothes, no bag, no identification beyond what he needed for the day. He locked the door and stepped outside. That short walk, just 8 blocks through a familiar residential area, should have taken no more than 10 minutes. But Jason never arrived at the school. His co-worker waited for him in the parking lot until nearly 11:15 a.m., assuming he might be running late. By 11:30, concern began to build. By noon, Jason's family began to worry. When his parents, Kelly and Jim Jolkowski, realized Jason hadn't shown up for work, they started calling friends, relatives, and the restaurant. No one had seen or heard from him. His phone was silent. At first, police treated it like a voluntary disappearance. A 19-year-old leaving home wasn't unusual, at least not by the standards of missing persons protocols in 2001. But within 24 hours, the Jolkowskis knew something was wrong. Jason had no reason to leave. His bank account remained untouched. His paycheck sat uncollected. Even stranger, no one saw him on the route. Not a single neighbor, driver, or passerby recalled seeing Jason that morning, despite the neighborhood being active and close-knit. He had simply vanished in broad daylight on a suburban street within a 10-minute window. Detectives later canvassed the area, interviewing residents, searching backyards, checking surveillance from local businesses, and even drains and wooded areas nearby. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses. It was as if Jason walked into thin air, a phrase his family has heard too many times over the years. For his mother, Kelly, the silence of that morning has never faded. He was supposed to walk half a mile, she once said. Half a mile. And somehow he never got there. By the afternoon of June 13th, 2001, concern had turned to panic. When Jason failed to return home, his parents knew something was seriously wrong. They called the Omaha Police Department, reporting him missing. But like so many families of young adults, they were met with the standard line: "He's 19. Maybe he just needed space." That assumption would cost precious time. The Jolkowskis insisted that Jason wasn't the type to simply disappear. He didn't drink, didn't use drugs, had no criminal record, and no signs of depression. He was a quiet, dependable young man who worked hard and loved his family. Even his teachers described him as polite, shy, and thoughtful. By the second day, police began to realize that this wasn't a case of a runaway or an argument gone wrong. It was something far stranger. Officers retraced his expected route from his home on 42nd Street to Benson High School, marking every driveway, alley, and yard. Nothing stood out. They canvassed the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen Jason between 10:45 and 11 a.m. No one had, not even the postal carrier who was delivering mail on the same block that morning. Forensics teams found no footprints, tire marks, or dropped items. Dogs brought to track his scent lost it less than 2 blocks from his home. That small detail haunts investigators to this day. Jason's scent vanished abruptly, suggesting he may have been picked up by a vehicle. But no one reported seeing a car stop. No witnesses recalled any confrontation, honking or shouting. The Jolkowskis, desperate for answers, began organizing their own search. They distributed thousands of flyers, posted missing person alerts across Nebraska, and contacted television stations and newspapers. Local news outlets picked up the story, calling it the half-mile mystery. Volunteers combed through parks, fields, abandoned buildings, and drainage ditches. Even nearby cemeteries and construction sites were checked. Nothing. Police checked Jason's phone and financial records. No unusual activity. His bank account remained untouched, and his cell phone showed no outgoing calls after that morning. The family hoped that maybe Jason had been in an accident, that he might appear in a hospital under a different name. But checks with every emergency room in the region came back negative. For the Jolkowskis, each hour without answers stretched into unbearable silence. His mother, Kelly, told reporters, "You can't help but feel that he's out there somewhere, and he needs us to find him. That's the worst part, not knowing where to look." Within days, the Omaha Police Department officially declared the disappearance suspicious. The FBI was contacted for assistance, though no immediate federal resources were deployed. There were no ransom calls, no suspicious emails, no contact of any kind. By all measurable logic, Jason should have been found within that 10-minute radius. But logic failed, and so began one of the most enduring missing person cases in Nebraska's history. When the world stopped searching, the Jolkowski family refused to. From the moment Jason disappeared, Kelly and Jim Jolkowski began a mission that would consume their lives. They organized search parties, knocked on doors, coordinated with volunteers, and contacted private investigators. Anything that could keep Jason's face in the public eye. They printed thousands of flyers, plastered light poles, convenience stores, and gas stations across Omaha and neighboring towns. They spoke to news reporters, national missing person networks, and online forums that were still in their infancy in 2001. But despite their efforts, the search always ended the same way, with no trace. Kelly became the family's voice, the one who faced cameras and detectives with steady eyes and heartbreaking composure. In interviews, she would always say the same thing: Jason didn't just vanish. Someone knows something. That belief kept the family moving, even as days turned into months. They organized vigils in the park near their home. They coordinated with local churches to host community awareness events. They even brought in search dogs and aerial photography teams, hoping for a clue in the suburban grid where Jason was last seen. But it wasn't just physical searching. Kelly started learning how missing person databases worked, how to contact national registries, how to advocate for attention in a system that often prioritized children or foul play cases. She learned quickly that adult disappearances fell into a gray area, one where law enforcement resources were stretched and cases could go cold within weeks. In many jurisdictions, if there was no evidence of a crime, there was little that could be done. And that's where Jason's case was stuck. No evidence of foul play, but no evidence of voluntary disappearance either. This ambiguous category, missing undetermined circumstances, left the family fighting bureaucracy almost as much as grief. At home, Jason's room remained untouched. His trophies, photos, and notebooks stayed where he left them. Kelly couldn't bring herself to move anything. "It still feels like he's just out at work," she said. "Like he's going to come through that door any minute." But behind her calm voice was exhaustion. The media attention had faded, and tips were dwindling. Then came the letters. Hundreds of them. People from across the country wrote to Kelly, sharing their own stories of loved ones who had disappeared. And through those letters, Kelly began to see something larger. That Jason's disappearance was not an isolated tragedy. It was part of a systemic problem, families left in limbo without legal tools or immediate police action. It was in those quiet, painful months that the idea for Jason's Law was born, not as a memorial, but as a weapon against indifference. By 2002, a year after Jason vanished, the Jolkowski family faced a reality that most people never imagine. Their son had disappeared in daylight, and there was still no evidence, no suspect, no answers. But rather than surrender to despair, Kelly Jolkowski decided to fight back, not just for Jason, but for every family trapped in the same unbearable silence. As she dealt with unreturned calls, delayed police responses, and jurisdictional confusion, Kelly realized something devastating. There's no uniform process for missing adults in America. Every case depends on where you live. At that time, there were established systems for missing children, largely thanks to the Amber Alert system and federal cooperation under the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. But adults, especially those between 18 and 25, fell into a dangerous void. Some departments waited 24 to 72 hours before taking reports seriously. Others refused to enter adult cases into federal databases unless there was proof of foul play. For parents like Kelly, it meant losing the most critical window for finding their loved ones alive. So, she began pushing for reform. She studied missing person laws across states, consulted legal experts, and started writing letters to local representatives. Her message was simple. Every missing person deserves to be searched for immediately, regardless of age. The momentum grew quickly. Her campaign gained attention from Nebraska lawmakers, the media, and other families facing similar struggles. By 2005, Kelly had partnered with advocates and the Nebraska state legislature to draft what would become known as Jason's Law. The bill established statewide standards for the immediate reporting and investigation of missing persons, including adults. It required law enforcement to accept and act on missing person reports without delay, and to share information with national databases like NCIC, National Crime Information Center. It also emphasized the creation of training programs for law enforcement, ensuring that officers understood the emotional and procedural urgency of these cases. In 2006, Nebraska passed Jason's Law, making it one of the first states in the U.S. to adopt comprehensive guidelines for missing person investigations. The law didn't just help future cases, it also transformed Kelly's grief into purpose. She later founded Project Jason, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping families of missing adults navigate the legal system, coordinate with police, and maintain hope. Jason's Law became a blueprint for other states, influencing similar legislation nationwide and inspiring federal conversations on reforming missing person protocols. As Kelly said at the bill's signing, if Jason's story can prevent even one family from going through this, then some good will have come from our pain. Though Jason himself was never found, his name became a symbol, not just of loss, but of action. From one disappearance, an entire movement was born. By the mid-2000s, public attention on Jason Jolkowski's case had faded, but behind closed doors, the Omaha Police Department never truly stopped investigating. Every year, detectives reviewed the files, revisited tips, and followed up on anything new that surfaced. When Jason's Law passed, it brought renewed pressure, not just from the public, but from within the department itself. The case that had helped reform state policy couldn't simply fade into paperwork. Detectives re-interviewed witnesses, neighbors, and former co-workers. They mapped every possible route Jason could have taken between his home and Benson High School, both direct and alternate paths. They also reanalyzed early tips that had been overlooked due to lack of context. One neighbor, for example, recalled hearing a car door slam around the time Jason would have left his house. Another mentioned seeing a red pickup truck slowly circling the area that week. But neither lead produced solid evidence. There were no signs of robbery or motive for foul play. Jason had no enemies, no debts, and no history of risky behavior. He wasn't dating anyone, and his phone and email activity offered no clues of a planned meeting or secret. It was, by all accounts, a perfect vanishing. Forensic specialists later suggested that Jason might have accepted a ride, willingly, from someone he trusted, or at least recognized. That theory remains one of the most plausible. Considering his polite and helpful nature, he may have stopped to assist someone, been lured by a familiar voice, or simply thought he was being kind. But without evidence, every theory was speculation. The FBI became involved in 2006 after Project Jason gained national traction. They reviewed data logs, DNA profiles, and cross-referenced missing person databases across multiple states. No matches, no trace. Even the National Center for Missing and Unidentified Persons, NAMUS, produced nothing. In 2009, a possible lead emerged, a set of unidentified remains found near Council Bluffs, Iowa, roughly 30 miles from Omaha. For a moment, hope and dread collided. But after weeks of testing, DNA results confirmed it wasn't Jason. Years later, in 2013, a witness came forward claiming to have seen a young man matching Jason's description walking near Maple Street the morning of his disappearance. The tip was investigated, but again there was no corroborating evidence. What baffled investigators most was the lack of any trace. No financial activity, no social media presence, no identification found anywhere in the country. Detective Bill Owens, one of the case's early investigators, summarized the frustration bluntly. You can't erase a person without leaving something behind, and yet, with Jason, there's nothing. Every search, every re-examination led to the same haunting conclusion. Jason Jolkowski walked into a space between seconds and never came back out. In the months after Jason's disappearance, Kelly Jolkowski lived in a fog of unanswered questions and emotional exhaustion. Every morning she checked her phone, her email, and the mailbox, hoping for a message, a sighting, a clue. Every night she prayed for strength just to repeat the process the next day. But as the years went on, she realized she wasn't alone. Across the country, hundreds of families were living the same nightmare. Their loved ones missing, their cases cold, their voices unheard. Out of that shared pain, Kelly found purpose. In 2003, she founded Project Jason, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting families of missing adults. At the time, there were few, if any, national resources for adult missing cases. The existing systems primarily focused on children, leaving families like hers adrift. Kelly started from her kitchen table using an old desktop computer and a second-hand printer. Her first goal was simple: to make sure no one ever felt as isolated as she had. Project Jason soon grew into a lifeline, offering guidance on how to file effective police reports, how to work with media, and how to navigate the emotional and legal labyrinth that follows a disappearance. The organization connected families to investigators, forensic experts, and one another. But what made Kelly's work different was her tone, empathetic, persistent, and fiercely practical. She didn't promise miracles, she promised movement. Through Project Jason, she also began organizing awareness campaigns, including Missing Person Week events and candlelight vigils across Nebraska. She partnered with national organizations like the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMUS, and NCIC, advocating for stronger cooperation between state agencies. Her voice became one of quiet authority in the missing person community. By the late 2000s, Kelly was traveling nationwide to speak at law enforcement conferences, helping officers understand the human cost of bureaucratic delay. When someone disappears, she told one audience, time is your most precious resource. You can replace everything else, but not the first 48 hours. That message resonated. Several states later modeled their own missing person protocols on Nebraska's Jason's Law, citing Project Jason's advocacy as a driving influence. But for Kelly, success was always bittersweet. Every law passed, every awareness event, every interview, they all circled back to the same wound. Jason was still gone. When asked how she maintained hope, she said, I have to believe he's out there. Because if I stop believing, then he's really gone. Project Jason became more than a non-profit. It became her connection to her son. And through it, Jason's name continued to echo, long after the media had moved on. For families of the missing, hope isn't a feeling. It's an act of survival. And for Kelly Jolkowski, that act became her life's mission. As the years turned into decades, most missing person cases from the early 2000s faded quietly into archives, but not Jason's. Thanks to Project Jason and Jason's Law, his name continued to appear in police briefings, true crime forums, and state reports. Every few years, as technology advanced, investigators took another look, hoping that something previously invisible might finally appear. By 2010, the Omaha Police Department had digitized its old evidence records, allowing detectives to cross-check Jason's information against national databases with new algorithms. They uploaded DNA samples from his family into CODIS and NamUs, ensuring that any unidentified remains found across the country could be automatically compared. Though no matches surfaced, it kept the case active. Detectives also began reviewing cell phone tower data, limited but potentially useful. In 2001, phone tracking technology was rudimentary, but by 2010, new digital reconstruction methods allowed analysts to create estimated coverage maps. The results were inconclusive. Jason's phone never pinged any tower after 10:45 a.m., the day he disappeared, but the absence itself told them something. Whatever happened likely occurred within minutes of his departure. Meanwhile, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit revisited the case profile. They concluded that Jason's disappearance showed signs of opportunistic abduction, fast, unplanned, and executed by someone who acted decisively. They theorized the suspect might have been someone working nearby that morning, a delivery driver, a construction worker, or a passerby who noticed Jason walking alone. It was chilling because it fit the pattern of other unsolved disappearances from the Midwest during that period, including cases in Iowa, Kansas, and South Dakota, where young men vanished under nearly identical circumstances. Though no formal link was ever established, the similarities were too striking to ignore. Then came the rise of true crime podcasts and digital sleuths. In 2016, Jason's case resurfaced in online discussions after several creators featured it in investigative series about vanishings in plain sight. Thousands of people began reanalyzing the evidence, mapping his route, identifying possible vehicles seen that day, even using satellite imagery to test theories. While most leads proved speculative, the renewed interest achieved something invaluable. It kept Jason's story alive in the public eye. The Omaha Police Department reopened community contact lines, asking anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. Some tips were bizarre, others sincere. None broke the case open. But for Kelly Jolkowski, every spark of interest was a victory. The day people stop asking about Jason, she said, is the day we truly lose him. And so, every new generation of detectives, journalists, and citizens continues to revisit the same question that has haunted Nebraska for nearly a quarter century. How does someone disappear on a half-mile walk and leave nothing behind? As investigators and advocates revisited Jason Jolkowski's case, one question kept surfacing. Was this an isolated tragedy or part of a pattern? Over the next 2 decades, analysts began noticing striking parallels between Jason's disappearance and other cases in the American Midwest. Men aged 18 to 25, healthy, responsible, often vanishing on foot in daylight within walking distance of home, leaving behind no evidence of struggle, robbery, or voluntary escape. Some of these disappearances clustered near college towns or suburban areas. Theories ranged from opportunistic abduction to organized crime, even to serial offenders operating unnoticed across state lines. One of the earliest comparisons came from Iowa, 2002, a young man named Christopher Thompson who disappeared while walking home after work in a quiet residential neighborhood. Like Jason, his case produced no evidence, no suspects, no trace. Then came others. Jesse Ross vanished from Chicago in 2006 after leaving a conference. Brandon Swanson disappeared in Minnesota in 2008 after his car broke down. Last heard saying, I think I see the lights of town. Tyler Davis, missing from Ohio in 2019 after walking away from a hotel in the early morning hours. In each of these cases, the similarities were chilling. No body, no signs of violence, and a sudden vanishing within a narrow time window. Some criminologists began informally referring to these as Midwest vanishings, a series of mysterious disappearances that defied explanation. While most experts stopped short of linking them formally, the pattern was undeniable. Young men, short distances, total erasure. Could Jason have been one of the earliest victims of an unidentified offender operating regionally? Or was his case a tragic coincidence amplified by geography and chance? The FBI's analysts leaned toward coincidence, pointing to the rarity of physical evidence and the lack of consistent suspect descriptions. But others, especially those in the true crime community, weren't convinced. Some digital investigators even noted geospatial overlaps between Jason's last known area and trucking routes, delivery hubs, and construction projects active that summer, suggesting that a transient worker or driver might have been involved. In several other vanishings, similar occupational patterns appeared. Whatever the explanation, Jason's disappearance helped expose a larger systemic blind spot, the way law enforcement agencies often treat disappearances as isolated local incidents rather than potential parts of regional or serial patterns. Project Jason, in collaboration with national missing person databases, began cataloging these cases side by side, searching for common threads. They found more than coincidences. They found neglect, cases forgotten because they didn't fit the media's preferred narratives. In that sense, Jason's story became a mirror, reflecting not just one mystery, but a culture of oversight. Kelly Jolkowski put it best. If Jason's case has taught us anything, it's that silence connects more than one family. There are hundreds of us, still waiting for the same call. In the decades since Jason Jolkowski vanished, the world around his story has changed, not only in technology and awareness, but in law itself. Because from one family's heartbreak came a blueprint that reshaped how America responds when someone goes missing. Before 2006, the system was fragmented. Every state, county, and even city had its own procedures. Some police departments waited 24 or 48 hours before filing adult missing person reports. Others refused to act without proof of foul play. That bureaucratic gap cost lives. But after the passage of Jason's law in Nebraska, things began to shift. The law mandated immediate entry of missing person reports into national databases, eliminated waiting periods, and standardized how information was shared between jurisdictions. It also established training for officers, teaching them how to handle early-stage disappearances, especially those involving young adults in transitional ages, like Jason. Soon, other states followed suit. Between 2008 and 2015, more than a dozen legislatures cited Jason's law as a model, adopting similar statutes or modifying existing ones. Federal agencies began referencing it in workshops and conferences as a case study in how grassroots advocacy can drive systemic reform. The ripple effect didn't stop there. Kelly Jolkowski's organization, Project Jason, helped bridge the gap between grieving families and overwhelmed investigators. Through online education, missing person databases, and awareness campaigns, the nonprofit became a quiet but powerful force, one that inspired families to push for reform in their own states. Kelly also worked closely with NMIS, National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, to ensure families had access to modern tools, DNA submission, cross-matching with unidentified remains, and access to national search resources that once seemed unreachable. Even as she helped other families, Kelly remained clear about her motivation. Jason didn't disappear so that laws could be written, but if those laws save others, then his life has meaning beyond the mystery. That humility struck a chord nationwide. By the late 2010s, Jason's name appeared not just in missing person reports, but in law enforcement manuals, academic studies, and training academies. His story became a teaching tool, a reminder that behind every case number, there's a life and a family waiting for answers. And yet, despite all that progress, Jason himself remains missing. Each year, on June 13th, Project Jason shares a remembrance post online, a photograph of him smiling in his high school shirt with the caption, "Half a mile from home, forever in our hearts." It's a small gesture, but a powerful one, because it keeps his memory alive, not as a statistic, but as a catalyst. Jason Jolkowski's disappearance changed Nebraska, but his mother's fight changed the nation. There's something haunting about a distance so small, half a mile, becoming an unsolvable mystery. For Kelly and Jim Jolkowski, that short walk represents the longest journey of their lives. Each year, they revisit the route Jason was supposed to take that June morning in 2001. The sidewalks have been repaved, the houses repainted, but for them, every mailbox, every fence, every step carries a question that time has refused to answer. Jason's disappearance remains one of the most baffling missing person cases in America. No body, no evidence, no witnesses, just an absence that reshaped an entire state. And yet, from that silence, something remarkable emerged, a movement. Because of Jason, Nebraska became the first state to implement a standardized missing person response system. Because of Jason, hundreds of families now know where to turn when the unthinkable happens. And because of Jason, one mother's voice echoed loud enough to change how the nation searches. Even now, the case remains open. Detectives continue to receive tips, some credible, others not, but all treated with the same care. Technology evolves, and with it, the faint hope that one day a new tool, a new test, or a new discovery will close the circle. But for Kelly, closure doesn't mean proof, it means purpose. She once said, "I don't need to find Jason to know he matters. The laws, the families, the lives touched by his story, that's Jason's legacy." The story of Jason Jolkowski isn't one of despair, it's one of transformation. It's about how tragedy can be turned into law, and how one voice, amplified by love, can outlast silence. In every town hall where Jason's law is mentioned, in every police training session where officers are reminded to act fast, and in every parent's heart that still waits by the window, Jason is still there, a ghost not of fear, but of change. A reminder that justice isn't always about solving the mystery. Sometimes it's about ensuring the next one never happens. 24 years later, the Jolkowskis still light a candle every June 13th, not to mourn, but to promise. Because in that flame, Jason still walks, half a mile from home, forever remembered. If Jason's story moved you, share it, not just to remember him, but to honor every missing person whose name has faded from the news. Your voice can bring awareness, reform, and maybe even the truth. Subscribe for more real investigations, where silence is not the end, it's the beginning of change. Because Jason's law wasn't just written in ink, it was written in perseverance, faith, and love. Jason Jolkowski, the half-mile mystery, the walk that changed a nation.